We are live. Hi, word nerds. We are here today to talk about creativity. What is it? Where does it come from? And how do you unleash yours? So I am going to be talking a little bit, and this is going to get a little bit wishy-washy and a little bit crazy because I have some crazy ideas when it comes to creativity and getting your inspiration and where ideas come from and things like that. So I'm excited for this chat. So I want to talk a little bit to begin with about the very oldest ideas about creativity and the Greeks and the Romans in particular, and where those ideas started from, the fact that they thought of their inspiration and their creativity as coming from a separate source outside of themselves, as in like the muse or a daemon, or actually the original word genius was a separate thing from you. Your ideas came from your genius, and it's only when people started thinking of things as not separate, that they started saying this writer is a genius instead of this writer has a genius. And I know sometimes as a writer, it's hard for when somebody asks, where do you get your ideas from, to really pin that down, because I don't know about you guys, but mine really just seems to come out of nowhere. And so that comes from like an outside source, it feels like sometimes. So my first question for you guys, and Megan is first on my left here, is after that, like, oh God, where do you get your ideas from? Yay, that question. And do you ever feel like they come out of nowhere or from a separate source outside of you?
I am like the opposite. I am yeah, that was a killer info.
Yeah, wow.
Intro.
Yeah, okay.
I, however, tend to be very practical, and so while I do feel like sometimes it can feel like my ideas come out of nowhere, I also realize that when I am working on paying attention to those ideas when they come and really like trying to exercise that muscle, I tend to get more ideas. And so I feel like for me personally, it's a lot about just like noticing when I see something and think like, oh, that's weird, or oh, that's interesting. And then really just exercising the muscle of putting action to creativity. I don't know if that makes any sense, because it's...
No, it totally does.
I was first in the lineup, so... But yes.
So you actually have an answer when someone says, where do you get your ideas from? Because that has been the bane of my existence.
I don't... Yeah, I don't personally feel like it has to be some magical thing, like either you have it or you don't. I think that everyone, whether you think it comes from outside of you or whether you think it's something that you work on, I'm a very strong believer that anyone can be creative. You just have to figure out how to harness that.
Everybody's creativity is different too, I think.
For sure.
And same question for Rachel.
I often find sometimes that I'm like chasing ideas. So of course there's something like, oh, where do you get your ideas from? Like, well, I don't know. I had a really cool dream last night, and who knows where that came from. Or sometimes it'll just be, reading something else and being like, oh, I like that idea. And then there's just a kind of pops it does like pop out of nowhere. Where you're like, oh, but what if this happened instead? But like a lot of the times I'll think of something and be like, that's not quite right, but that's almost what I think. And then I kind of have to like catch up to something that I like, or like it's almost like if you have a word on the tip of your tongue, which is like an actual like biological thing, which is super cool. Anyways, it's like a psychological thing where you like can't quite think of it, but like you're trying to get there. That's what I feel like when ideas hit, where I'm like, this is a cool idea, but there's something else to it, and I have to kind of like really like it, kind of like what Megan said, like to get that muscle, like, and then be like, oh, like I can almost get there. And then when I finally like catch the idea, I'm like, oh, that's great.
You have to chase the genius. I like that idea. I like it. That's a really cool idea of way of thinking about it, chasing your ideas. That's cool. What about you, Emma?
I mean, I've had a couple of ideas that like felt like they came out of nowhere. Like one time I was like getting dressed to like go for a run, and I had like an idea just like pop into my head out of nowhere, like nothing prompted it. It was like 8 a.m. I'm normally not thinking clearly at that time. So like that's happened a couple times, but most of the time I find my ideas come from like other people, like from like other like forms of art, other books, things people say, like conversation. Like they come from like other sources, and then it's my brain like sorting through that and thinking about it and figuring out like what kind of story that could be. Like it'll be like a little like seed, and my brain like can't let it go and is like, what if that, or kind of like Rachel was talking about, like what if this one thing was different in this story, or what if this character was put in a different situation. So and then, yeah, it's like my brain kind of like cycling through that while I'm working on other things and like slowly piecing it together and figuring it out.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question for you guys, which is when you don't have ideas freely coming to you, do you have like a place you go or something, some ritual that you do? Like for me, I'll go to the movies. If I have no inspiration for some reason, the movies are a really good place. Even seeing the previews will sometimes like make an idea just pop into my head. So do you guys have a place that you can reliably go to, or something to do that will help you with a dry spell as far as ideas go?
I haven't had a shortage of like story ideas in a long time. Probably because it takes me so long to finish a first draft that by the time I finish it, I've had like 10 other ideas.
Waiting in the wings.
So I'm normally not like, I have no ideas for another book to write. Like I think that's something you're always scared of as a writer. Like what if one day I just run out and there's nothing else? But that's never been a problem.
I'm always on Pinterest. Like that's, if I need an
kind
idea.
Kind of like Megan was saying, new idea syndrome.
Oh, sorry.
Does something lag? Oh, my bad. Okay.
Oh. No, I can. No, to say, I think that's like why like shiny new idea syndrome is such a big thing, is because when you're writing all the time and you're working on something and you're like exercising that creative muscle, you start having more and more ideas because your brain is like thinking in those creative ways. So really just like, yes, things like going to the movies help me too, for sure, because I get so many of my ideas from other like things. But also just like working on something, even if it's just like free writing about a character or something.
Yeah, free writing is actually something that I find helpful sometimes if I'm not necessarily stuck for ideas, because like you said, that's not too often. And even when I'm going to the movies, it's usually like, it's almost like a form of writer's block, but I'm blocked as far as like story goes. Story block. So I will go to the movies or watch like a TV show people keep recommending, that type of thing. And then even sometimes if it's like a plot hole or something that I need to solve, like I think it was Emma actually who recommended Broadchurch to me, because I had run into this issue with Witches of Ashton Ruin where I'm like, I know I'm missing something in this, like what is essentially a murder investigation, but I don't know what. It needs something else. And so that's when I go in search of other inspiration, and Emma had recommended Broadchurch to me, and I watched it and went, like first episode, I was like, oh my God, because it was a depiction of like everything that hit the fan when they found this murder victim. And one of the things was, it was a big plot line, don't break this to the press. And then the press, it was like leaked and the press come in, and I'm like, oh, that's something that would absolutely happen in this small gossipy town, and it's not realistic not to have it happen in some way. And then that really was the catalyst for driving a lot of that plot forward and making it seem like the world building so much better. So that I still believe that's a form of creativity and a form of inspiration, is sort of fleshing out your story idea with outside sources, so to speak.
Yeah, I have run into the problem where I was hoping to start writing a new idea and did not have any. I had a baby recently, and I didn't have a story idea after my revisions, and so I had done this big wave of revisions right after I'd had a baby, and recovery was brutal. And I sent in my revisions to my agent, and she didn't like them. I mean, she was really nice about it, but she was like, this needs another go. And so I was like, oh, I need some time to think about these things and figure out, what am I going to do next and what's going to be my next move. And I had nothing. And so I started panicking, as one does, like, maybe this is it. And I found really similar to what you guys are saying, that even when you have no ideas on the horizon, that consuming new and interesting things and old familiar things that have inspired you in the past, but for me particularly new and interesting things, was really crucial. So I went out and I started dancing again, and I tried out a self-defense class that my community offered for free, and all of those different things. Definitely just like living life and experiencing new things brought in new things that I could write about. And eventually I did get another idea, because if you're trying, you'll get one eventually.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think you have to get out of your own head sometimes, and so stuff like that can help. Like when you're, because especially like getting stuck within an actual, like a specific story sometimes, like you're like trying to rack your brain, like how do I get through this like plot hole, or how do I like untie this like knot in my story, and you like get so focused on it that like there's no way you're gonna have an idea. So sometimes that's why something like watching a movie or reading a book or whatever can help, is because you focus on something else, and then like the idea works itself out while you're not paying so much attention to it.
Yeah, that's very true. I also like bouncing ideas off of other people. So even, and I know that that's not like a secret of being like, I think it's called like talk to a rubber duck or something. Like that's not a secret of like saying it out loud will kind of like help you process it and like come up with an idea to fix it. But like bouncing your ideas off of other people is so valuable, because then someone else is like, oh, but like you didn't mention about that, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't, and then like that can, you know, bring something about, or they're like, oh, I don't know, like it sounds too similar to this thing, and then you're like, okay, right, you know, do that. So just getting other perspectives is really helpful.
Absolutely.
And like if everybody that you're around is creative, then obviously they're gonna have something as well that you can, you know, work in or give a different perspective. So like that helps a lot as well. Like my family's very, I like to say my family's very witty, and like a lot of stuff is very like quick comebacks. So like having friends and family like that makes it easier, like more creative. If you're just gonna be like just like saying something funny, or you're even just like being sarcastic, can like open up something new. I like that a lot.
It's definitely like, to expand on that, it's definitely good to know who to bounce ideas off with. Like I have friends that don't read, right? So I'm not necessarily going to bounce ideas off of them, because they would probably be like, okay, that sounds weird, or like, why don't you try this? And it's like, oh, that's a trope. But having friends that are super, super creative, like I talked about this in actually my goals video, about how Kelly and I, when I went to Toronto, had this like amazing back and forth, because she had so many, she was like overflowing with all of these amazing ideas, and it made the drafting process go from pulling teeth to like really fun and exciting, because it became creative again. You know, I had got into this place where it felt very stilted and mechanical, and it wasn't fun anymore. And then it was like the dam was kind of like broken after that conversation, and it felt creative again, you know.
Well, especially considering creative types, if you're doing something like creative types, us are by ourselves are like kind of, we're hard to pin down, and there's obviously like so many things going on. We're constantly like focused on all this stuff and like being creative and like coming up with those ideas. And then once you turn it into work, of course, anytime you love something that you turn it into work, it honestly like takes a different perspective on it. So being able to like have that fun again and like remind yourself that like, wow, I am a creative person, I like doing this, is so much easier. So if you're bouncing it off someone that, or you're having a good conversation with somebody that is also a writer, also another creative type, like you can just kind of like hype each other up and be like, oh my gosh, like I remember why this was so fun, and like, yeah, I'm gonna write that plot twist, and oh, that's such a cool idea for a world, and then that can like get you going again.
Absolutely.
I definitely think like a lot of times when your creativity feels dried up, it's because you're like so deep in like the weeds of writing or revising or whatever it is. You've like lost that fun of it and the enjoyment of it. And I find times like that are always a good time to like reread or rewatch something that you just like really, really love, like those like deep, like, I don't want to say guilty pleasures, but those like deep pleasures you have in certain stories. Because like a lot of times if I'm like rewatching like The Mummy, which is like one of my favorite movies of all time, like it's just so fun, and like it reminds me like how fun stories can be. Or I'll like be rereading an old favorite and be like, oh, I want to be able to write something that feels like this, like something that's like lasted with me the way some of those books and movies have. So
that's a really good point about when stuff stops being fun or stops being creative for you. And because I often get asked the question sometimes, that people are like, when you have deadlines or when you start writing for people, for your publisher, for your editor, does that take away some of your creativity? Does it take the fun out of it? Because you're not really you know, you don't really have just all this free reign anymore. And I really do believe that that's one of the reasons why book 2, for like everyone I talk to, I'm in all these author groups, and like book 2 is killing me. And I think that that is partly because it can put a cramp on your creativity, writing for someone. But I find, and actually this is something that I really have to work on myself, is that my attitude is a huge part of it. So if I'm, I tend to sulk if I don't get like totally free range with my creativity, and I can do whatever I want with the story and go wherever I want with it. But then if I take on contracted work, that's on me. I have to know that you don't have full range, and so stop whining and like try to enjoy it in spite of that, right? So that's a lesson that I'm really learning, and it's been a hard lesson to learn. But yeah, it does affect the creative process really strongly, I think. But I hope it can still be fun.
Yeah, it's like working in group projects all over again, where you're like, I have this great idea, and someone's like, no, we can't do that. It's like too outrageous, or like it's too much. You're like, okay, well, what about this other idea? They're like, I guess so. Like, and then they do like only like you know, half of the work, and then it's like not even that good. And you're like, but I had such a good idea.
It's like my great English class all over again.
Yeah, I don't know. I do find, and again, this is just proof that your mileage may vary. Everyone's experience might be different, but I find it pretty empowering having deadlines and having things that are expected of me with my writing, which is part of why like I ask my agent to give me a deadline for all the things that I'm doing, because I like knowing that, you know, my creativity is going somewhere, someone is expecting it from me. And yeah, I can bump into like, oh no, I'm hitting the deadline and I haven't figured things out yet. But I don't know. For me, it helps spur things along, knowing that someone who is really excited about my writing and the things that I'm creating is anxiously waiting for that thing on a certain day.
Yeah, I should clarify too, because I didn't necessarily, because deadlines do help me tremendously, because otherwise I will literally just be like, well, there's something great on Netflix. So I do need deadlines. I should have said, clarified, like ghostwriting type things are what I meant. Like, you're not dealing with your own world, you're not dealing with your own characters, and where do you go with your creativity at that point, right? So that's more, you know, what I tend to complain about. But yeah, deadlines are so necessary for me too. Otherwise, like I said, it's like, I could watch The Office again for the 6th time.
Well, like it allows you to like rein in your creativity too, because sometimes you need someone to be like, okay, like that's enough. Like work with what you have.
Otherwise, you're gonna have like a 900-page book that like goes nowhere. Yeah, you've got all these ideas for things.
Yeah, that's really true. The funny thing is, like knowing creative people and being really good friends with them is so funny, because I have one that is like, she is the best person to bounce ideas off of. And so if I ever have any problem with like where my plot is going or something, I'll sit down and be like, help me. And also she applies this to every area of her life. So she'll be like, let's go do this, let's do that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't, like, settle down. Right. So it's like every aspect of her life. But it's also just like so tremendously fun being in her life, because there's always something crazy going on, essentially. And like I said, she's just literally the best person to come to and be like, help me fix my plot, please, for the love of God. But yeah,
there's definitely a balance to find.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. You encounter the people who are like, I don't want anyone to ever tell me what to do with my book and my writing, and a lot of times their like work is like, it is sometimes too much, you know, like it needed to be reined in and they didn't have anyone to tell them, rein this in a little bit, you know, because it's easy to get carried away sometimes, because you're like, you're so excited about all these things that you want to include. Like I find myself all the time being like, I'm going to include like this trope I love, and like this like scene that I'm excited about, and this thing and this thing and this subplot, and then I'm like, this is too much.
It's a lot. Yeah. And I think
all of it.
You do really run, and especially as someone who's been to a lot of writing conferences, I have run into a lot of people that are that have confused I'm a creative person and I get to be creative with nobody is ever allowed to edit me. And I run into these people a lot, because it's good to be creative. It's great to be creative, but you know, it's also important to realize your work isn't perfect at first either, and you might need some help. You know, once you are creative and it's all on the page, it should need to be made even better, like polish that, right?
Yeah,
It's not,
focused
focus that creativity so it can be effective for other people that are consuming it, you know?
And I always have to like remind myself that like there will be more books and like I can include these things I'm excited about in other books.
You don't need to cram it all in.
Sometimes this is gonna be my only book. I have to fit everything I want in this one.
And I think that because you know not everyone has like a ton of writer friends or an agent or an editor to be like, calm down. But I do think that the longer you write and the more you revise even just your own work, you get better at figuring out what is unnecessary, what needs to be reined in, what needs to be let out to play more. Just like the more you read and write, the better you get at it. And I would assume that goes for other creative endeavors as well, although writing is my creative endeavor of choice.
Yeah. I think we had a few questions up the chat thread if you want to scroll for that. And there's something else I was going to ask you guys when my notes fell off. That's why. Okay, something I have to recommend if you're looking for books on creativity, and you guys have probably heard me talk about this nonstop in other chats, is Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. She's the one that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And I have never read Eat, Pray, Love, and I frankly don't care about it, to be honest. But Big Magic was so good, and she's one of those people that believes in that slightly wacky idea of ideas being separate from the writer and as being almost like sentient beings. And this idea really captures my interest. I don't know if I believe it, but she actually it's almost like not a religion exactly, but she communicates with the ideas and talks to them essentially. And she thinks that if you don't write down an idea fast enough or you don't dedicate yourself to that idea fast enough, it can go on to another writer. And she talks about this. I find that idea fascinating. And she talks about it in Big Magic a lot, and how she originally had this idea about this woman who goes to the Amazon and falls in love with someone there or something like that. It's quite a few details. And then she met a woman years later who is another writer and had this woman goes to the Amazon and falls in love, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the details matched up. So she's like, I firmly believe I didn't have that idea. I didn't take that idea seriously enough, didn't do it fast enough. So it moved on to her.
Oh, that's so weird. That's so cool.
Very interesting idea.
I don't believe in this at all or whatever. I don't believe in woohoo things, but funny story, funny coincidence or whatever, was that Erin and I were talking about this one week in writers group, and she was talking about this book that she's writing involving a witch, and there's an alternate version of this world, and it's called The In-Between. And that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard, because last year, maybe 2 years ago now, I was working on a book that I ended up shelving that took place in St. Augustine and had witches, and they went to an alternate St. Augustine that was called The In-Between.
What? So weird.
Yeah, and you get and I really think that's so funny, and it wouldn't surprise me if that transferred over to me or something.
You know what? I actually realized that too, because there is a book that just came out that is based on an idea that I had 7 years ago, and I saw this. I didn't even know. It's the new book by Charlie Jane Anders. She did all the Birds in the Sky, I think is the first one. It's The City at Night, I think is what it's called. And it's set in a world where the planet doesn't circle. So half the planet is constantly in the sun and light, and the other half is in darkness. And everyone lives in the border of dawn and dusk around the planet. And some people live underground on the sun side, and it's about two people on opposite sides, kind of I think there's a rebellion and someone's fallen in love or whatever. But I remember having that idea when I was first starting to write, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if I could do that. But then I was like, I don't know. I don't really have a plot line for it. And then I saw that on the shelf, and I was like, oh, cool. She has a new book out. And I looked at it. I was like, what? Someone finally wrote this. Oh my gosh, this is so weird.
Sometimes it does feel so specific that you're like, how did this happen? You know?
Well, I think it's
sometimes you're in the middle of writing a book and you find out someone has already written something really similar. So I think it's just the fact that people tend to have
it is for sure.
ideas.
I do find that like weirdly comforting as well, that like there are so many ideas that like someone's going to write a book that's similar to the book that you've written. Someone has probably already written a book that's similar to the book that you've written. So you can just like relax. There's not to make it perfect because yours is going to be the only book just like it. And like it will, there won't be another book just like it, but like you have time, you can take a breath, you can let yourself be as creative as you want.
Yeah.
World changing.
Nobody's going to be able to tell the same story that you personally can tell. Like they're not going to have your voice. So that's really not ever anything that you have to worry about. And I know a lot of new writers do. Like, should I write this idea? I know that this is similar to this other book. And it's like, just write it.
And I know for a fact that like if I resurrected my witch book, it would be very different because I know what Erin's book is.
Actually, I just saw this really cool thing. It was online. It was actually from George R. R. Martin because he was talking about his books and how he was writing, and he had just, I think, put out the second book. And he was being interviewed, and he said, "Yeah, I've had people talk about their theories, and some people have already guessed the twist that I'm going to put in the 6th book." And the 2nd book just came out. So he says, well, now what do you do? Because, you know, some people would look at that and be like, oh, well, you know, we can't have that because people have already guessed it. So now I have to rewrite the whole thing. But then if you go back and you rewrite the whole thing when, you know, if it's a murder mystery and you want to say that, you know, Colonel Mustard did it, but now, you know, but then someone guessed it. So now you make Lady Scarlet do it. You know, it doesn't match anymore because you had originally planned it some way. So like, what do you do in that situation? I thought that was really interesting because he's like, no, like even if they guessed it, like stick with what you were going to do.
I've seen that interview.
Yeah, because only some people have. I was like, oh, that's genius. I think Westworld. This is where how I found that, because Westworld did that because people from the first episode on Reddit guessed what was going to happen in the 2nd episode. So they scrapped it and rewrote the whole episode. And there was a bit of like, kind of not controversy, but like there was some talk on the internet of like, is that the right thing to do? Should have you just done it anyway? Like, how does this affect the whole storyline?
I think this is like a lot of like fan speculation and stuff, but I think that was a really big downfall of the end of Game of Thrones, the TV series, because like the TV producers and writers, like it seems like they were like kind of obsessed with like surprising everyone and like subverting expectations because that's what the show's always done. But the problem is, especially with something like that, because it's been on for so long and people are so familiar with it, we now know what to expect from the show. You know, it's easy when you're writing like the first book and people don't exactly know what to expect from something, you know, but there's a lot of speculation that they changed the last couple seasons because people figured out, people guessed and speculated, and you have so many people watching it that like someone's going to guess your ending. Like,
definitely.
Well, like, also, if you make a good character, then you can already like follow where that's gonna go, and so it doesn't matter because you can already see like where their arc is gonna go. So maybe that's where they're like, oh well, we can't have that. Like we need to make it different and stuff.
Surprise everybody! Nobody can guess what we're doing. But like, if it's so surprising that nobody guesses it, then like you probably haven't set it up well.
And if you like this conversation and Game of Thrones, keep an eye out for Emma's next video, which is me and Emma and Kelly talking for 2.5 hours about the character development on Game of Thrones and making a bracket of all the Game of Thrones characters.
Nice.
So,
oh my gosh, you guys are hilarious.
In your way.
In about 3 weeks, that'll be up.
That long, but we talked about this exact thing on it.
Yep.
So one of the things that I was so excited to do this chat was because I have been doing a lot of research, not just on creativity and where ideas come from, but the creative process and getting into what's called a flow state. And I know you guys have heard about this, and also because I've talked about it probably nonstop. And I have only ever been in flow state once in the entire time that I have been writing. And for those that aren't sure, I'm sure most people have heard of like getting in the flow or getting in the zone, but it's an actual scientific, I guess, process that your brain enters into the state And usually it means you lose track of time. You're just not worrying about anything. You'll probably tune out sounds, that type of thing. The one time that I was in that state, I sort of like woke up and went, whoa. And I completely I was supposed to go meet someone for coffee, and their phone call was what like zapped me out of it, because they were like, you're supposed to be here 15 minutes ago. And it was just, and I think I wrote a ridiculous amount of words as well, and they were actually good. And so I've always kind of chased that ever since then. And I find that a very interesting part of the creative process, that some people seem to get into this state all the time and others don't at all and spend a lot of time chasing it. Hello. So Megan, you're on my left, have you ever had this before?
I don't know that I can personally say I have. I know I've heard of authors like Kirsten White who talk about like, oh, I wrote 65,000 words in a week. And that's just not my, she talks about how,
are you alive? Like, whoa.
Yeah, she talks further about how like after something like that, she has to take a very large break and stuff. And I personally don't know that that's my experience. I have definitely had moments where the words were really flowing, but never like, I had this out of body experience.
Blanking out.
Just a lot of like, I'm really enjoying what I am doing, and I want to sit here and keep doing that thing because I am loving it.
Rachel, what about you?
I don't think I've ever been in the flow. Maybe I've been in the zone. Like I can.
It's like levels.
Yeah, kind of. Like I do that with essays a lot. And I do that with writing, where sometimes like I get a good start, and then I'm like, I'm in the zone, I'm doing it, but I don't think I've ever like blacked out or anything, and then like a book's written.
Wish on the floor, like a kissing scene or something. It's like, why do I have to be present in my body for writing this?
Here, you need to learn to introduce it so you can just do the romance scenes.
Yeah.
What about you, Emma? Any experience with that?
I don't think I've had it like as strongly as you described. But I'll like occasionally, like for me, like writing a lot of the time is a struggle. Like it's like pulling teeth like a lot of the time. But then like, yeah, like sometimes like I'll slip into like a part of a scene a lot of times that'll like come really quickly. And I also usually have like portions of a book that come a lot faster than others. So I'll be like struggling along for like half the book, and then suddenly I'll like hit a point where I'm like, I'm good to go. And like for weeks, it'll just be like really easy for me to write. But it definitely comes in like bits and bursts, and like not super frequent for me. And it'll take a lot of like days of just like writing like 200 words and feeling exhausted. And then like suddenly I'm like, here we go.
Yeah, I think you can get into different levels of it for sure. There's a guy, I'm not going to be able to remember his name, but he's a scientist who actually dedicates his entire career to studying how like the flow, what it is, what state your brain is in when that happens. And he tries to teach people how to get yourself into it essentially. And it's something about the level of craft versus the level of skill. So if you're an experienced writer, writing something that is challenging for you, but not too challenging. And then I was talking to a musician, my friend's a writer, and her husband is a musician, and he often gets into the state of flow when he's playing his guitar. Musicians, athletes, all of those types of people get into
playing music. Now I'm thinking about it.
Okay, so you can definitely get into a flow state with other things. And so he said one of the things he does to trigger it is actually he will exercise really hard and get the endorphins going. And then he says after that he's tired, so he takes it like a hit of caffeine, essentially as a cup of strong coffee. And then he can get directly into the flow state. And I haven't tried this yet, and I keep meaning to, but it's because I'm lazy. I haven't tried exercising yet. But I want to.
Yeah, no, count me out for cardio.
That sounds like not
sounds like a lot of work,
exercising, but it sounds like you crash afterwards. And I want
to try it because he said like it's like a trance state, right? So the endorphins hit you, the caffeine hits you, and you can just go right into this. Yeah. So I'm gonna try it someday. I'll report back. But yeah, I've always been very interested in trying, because it was just one of the most bizarre, effortless, and it was a couple of hours of writing. And I don't usually do that. It's like It's all be like 15 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna have a Twitter break. Oh, another 15 minutes. Okay, back to Twitter, right? And I don't like. I need to stop doing that. But also, just getting into that state was like, whoa, has it been 3 hours? You know. So.
Can you please just get a GoPro headband for this?
Yeah.
For the whole thing.
It would just be me sitting there staring at a screen, or working out first and then drinking coffee.
And you're like wild-eyed and like,
oh man, yeah. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of comments in the comment section saying that a lot of other people have got into this state before.
It's interesting that you were talking about other things, and then suddenly I was like, oh,
yeah,
I used to play the flute quite a lot. I don't do it as much anymore, but back in high school and early college, I would play a lot, and that was definitely like when you get so. It was usually when I was so nervous because I was performing for something and I wanted to do so well and just like really get into the emotions, that like. It would feel like I had blacked out and like come to at the end. It's like, oh, I did it.
Yeah.
I totally agree. You like get to the end of the piece and you're like, did I play it? I don't know. How did it go?
Yeah, exactly.
I remember like one time, and I mostly did stuff that involved like larger groups, like bands and orchestras. But I remember one time we like had like our big like evaluation performance, and we did like our opening number, which was this like energetic march piece, and like we played it like twice as fast as we were supposed to, and none of us like realized it until the end, and our band director was like, it was a little fast, but you were all into it, as I could tell. So we had like a communal blackout flow experience apparently.
I love that so much.
That's hilarious. I really think another thing that the actual scientist guy talks about is establishing, and I talked about this in one of the videos, is establishing a routine that is strong enough that it becomes a doorway sort of into this state, because you're training your brain to know when it's time to write. So, you know, you sit down, you light a candle, you're listening to this same sort of music every time, you're in the same spot every time, and that can induce flow state that will help you. And I think it's because of, you know, when it's like automatically your body language, that type of thing, or like, habits that are so habitual that you forget you've done them. Like, for example, in the morning, I always go and get my car, come back, park it so I can load everything up before I take small child to daycare. So I do this every single morning, 5 days a week. So it's just such a habit that yesterday morning, I went, did I get the car? I could not remember getting up, walking all the way down my street. It's like a 5-minute walk, getting in the car, driving back, and parking it. I'm like, did I do that? I should know if I did that. I should know if I got behind the wheel of a car and drove. And it was a little like, am I like, do I have a brain tumor? What is happening here? Why can't I? And I went and looked out the window. I'm like, the car's in the lot. That is scary. That I couldn't remember, like, because it was just so automatic. You know, I'm sure you guys have done this before, where you're like, did I do this? Yes, I already did it. It's such a habit. I don't remember any of it. And I think that can help induce flow state, for sure, getting into this pattern.
I feel like so much of creativity is getting into the habit of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Statement or whatever. So much of it is doing a thing consistently.
Yeah,
and also like, I find also like giving yourself enough time to get into even just like a semi flow state or something. Cause like a lot of times, it's like I'm going to write for 15 minutes and then I'm going to go check Twitter and then another 15 minutes, go check again. But like, if you, stop doing that. Usually it's like, if I can get through like a couple, like 15 or 20 minute sprints without stopping to go look at something, then I like at least hit more of a groove. And I can like start getting a lot more done, and I don't get distracted because then I'm like more into the story because I've like forced myself to like focus on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I went to the coffee shop this morning to get some of my revisions done, and I went there and was very distracted by Wizards Unite because a lot of people were on their phones, so a lot of confoundables were spawning in the area. And so I was just playing it so much, not getting anything done. And finally, I like looked down. I was like, I've drank like half of this coffee and haven't written anything. So I put my phone in my purse and just set it on the other side of the table. And it's a new coffee shop because I just moved, so I didn't know how the Wi-Fi worked, and I wasn't able to get onto the Wi-Fi, and I was too embarrassed to go ask the barista if there was a Wi-Fi code, what I needed to be doing. So I had no Wi-Fi at all, and I'd sat down. Once the phone was gone, I revised like 6,000 words, and some of those were brand new words, and it was just like, oh wow.
I actually got stuff done.
I do things.
Yeah, I really want to start implementing what Stephen King does, which is just when he's at his computer in his writing time, if he is blocked or anything like that, he does not let himself check Twitter or anything like that. He just sits there and stares at a screen. So he's like, you don't have to be writing, but you also can't do anything other than write. So just sit there. And I want to start doing that because if I have the option of checking Twitter when things get like a little bit hard while I'm writing, that's what I do. Right. And there's no such thing as just checking Twitter real quick. It's like at least 25 minutes. Like, come on.
I recently watched it was an old Susan Dennard video that she put on her YouTube channel. I will put a link in the discussion section to it in a couple minutes, but where she was talking about how she brainstorms a novel. And she was talking about like basically getting into this writing headspace all the time, not just when you're sitting down putting words on the page. That way it's easier to keep writing all the time. And so that's actually what my, not next video, but the one after that is going to be about, is I'm trying to do what she does. But she talks about how she keeps like her phone notepad nearby all the time. And also she keeps a voice recorder nearby all the time, which my phone has a voice recorder. And if she has an idea, if it's like a bit of dialogue, like if it's anything, she puts it on the notepad or voice records it and saves it. And then when she gets home, like once a week or whatever, she writes it all down on note cards. So she ends up with like this big plot or whatever.
Amazing.
And I am very interested in this. And this just the idea of being creative all the time, not
all the time.
The minutes when you have to sit down and write.
This actually really well leads into a question we had earlier from Barry is, do you guys carry a notebook with you? That was a good question. I do not, and I want to start doing that because I very often have plot ideas, which I write down in the notes section of my phone, but then they just stay there. I
always want to carry a notebook everywhere, but I don't carry a big enough purse, and I don't like having a really, because like I have like some shoulder and back issues, and I don't like carrying a super heavy purse with lots of stuff, and so like I have to restrict myself to a small one, or else I am going to like fill it with things. So I like never like really have room, except for something like really small, and I hate writing in really tiny notebooks, so it just ends up being my phone, and then I eventually like once every few months and like let me transcribe everything that I've put in my phone into a physical notebook.
Yeah, same.
See, that's what I really want to do, because I was listening to, it might have been Susan Donner, I don't know, another author saying that like her notes are everywhere, scattered in like a million different notebooks and everything. So what she did was went through all of them and just put them on a file on her desktop, and so now all of the ideas are in one place, and I'm like, oh my god, like I really want to do this, but I just have to keep putting it off because I know it's going to take hours, because I have notes from when I was like first started writing like 10 years ago. So it's gonna be a long job, but I do want to do that at some point.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of the index cards. So like I had a scene idea, and I keep a wad of index cards in my purse, and so it was just like, oh, sleepover in their star-shaped house in the center of it, and let's have them sleep in the points of it. And like that means nothing to you guys, but it means a lot to me. And it's like I see this and I'm like, ah, yes. And then later I can take, this is like a big stack of note card ideas that I have for this story. And then later I can be like, ah, yes, this will go here and this will go here.
So do you use note cards, Megan, for your other like separate ideas too, or just for when you have an idea for a scene for one story?
I just do them all the time. I also have one over here somewhere. Yeah. I have one that came from a dream where I just said, a weird child's game with 3 parts. Speak your truth, lie witch hitting, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Ooh, it sounds cool.
I don't know what it is, but it sounds amazing.
Yeah, like,
if something comes to me, I just write it on here, and then I set it next to my computer monitor, and like once every couple weeks I go through like, can I use any of this, or do I need to set it behind my monitor for a little longer?
That's cool. Really quickly, I actually have to leave a little bit early for this chat, so I gotta go now. But it was great talking to you guys, and thank you everybody for watching. So I'll say goodbye early. See you next week. Goodbye.
I really like the idea of index cards. Something about the being able to shuffle through them really appeals to me. I don't know why. So maybe I'll start.
It's very satisfying.
Yeah, I even have a little. Oh, here it is. I even have a little like index card holder, and these are all empty. So, like, there's nothing on them. I say I should really just like start doing that. Maybe I'll do that now.
I love index cards so they're the
We like office supplies, okay?
Yeah. Well, and they're so inexpensive, you know. They're way less expensive than the pretty notebooks that I have, and then get angry because I make them disorderly and stop using them.
Yeah, the issue with notebooks is I get these really beautiful ones, and then I'm like, I'll use this notebook for ideas, and then I'll write like 6 ideas in it and lose the notebook, and then I start the same thing. Oh, so I have like 8 notebooks with just the beginnings of ideas in them. So the index card thing is smart.
I've kind of transferred over now to just using my notebooks for world building since I do write fantasy. So I will put all of my world building notes into one notebook, and then later I can refer back to it if I need to. But then like all the plot and character ideas, I'm just doing on the go because I don't usually have that many world building ideas on the go since that is my weak point.
Yeah, I use notebooks a lot more for like brainstorming stuff where I'm like sitting down trying to figure things out. More of my like organizing ideas, or just like if I'm just like noting down an idea, that usually goes on my phone. If I'm like trying to organize stuff, that goes in like Evernote or something. So
yeah, I feel like brainstorming is this whole other side of creativity where it's like, it's time to force it.
Yeah.
It will be creative now.
That's really true. Although creativity is still such a part of brainstorming, but you're really using your creative brain in a different way. So that's an interesting thing too, because I do the same thing as you, Emma. I brainstorm everything by hand. I've tried on the computer, and I just get like immediately blocked if I do that. I don't know why.
Yeah, I brainstorm everything in a notebook, but I very soon like have to go and organize it into something like Evernote, because like I talked about in a recent video with my spreadsheet, like I hate when it's like months later and I'm like, where's that like one thing I wrote down about like a character, and like I had it in the middle of like I had the idea in the middle of thinking about world building, so it's in a different space than the rest of the character notes. So I have to like get everything organized in a computer after I've done the messy work of brainstorming.
See, I am the same. I get frustrated, but I just remain frustrated. And
I did for a long time.
Yeah, because I'll do that where I'm like, I'm just writing out ideas, and then I'll be like, same as you, I'll be like, oh, this idea, and then I'll write it like in tiny cramp writing in the margins or something, and then be driven absolutely crazy when I have to go back and try to find it. So yes, I know that I should do the work, but I'm lazy.
We had a recommendation from Misty Kate, who has recently found Scapple fun to brainstorm in, which is something I've always wanted to try. I am very fascinated by the idea of Scapple.
What is it?
It's made by the same people who make Scrivener, but it's more of just like basically like an online whiteboard or a computer whiteboard where you can kind of just like shuffle your ideas around and like draw them on. It's
kind of cool.
Wheeling or whatever.
Oh, neat. I used to have like, I love the idea of a like a cork board that you would put like notes on and article clippings and like magazine clippings and that type of thing, because I've seen that. I think it was in a movie or something. I saw like an artist or a writer with that on their wall, like their idea board, and I was like, that's so cool. But then I think I put it up once and I just never filled it, right? Like I think I had one article from a newspaper pinned to it, because I just am a lazy person and I don't think to cut out an article or even look for them, because I don't know.
This was many years ago now, but I went to Seattle for a wedding, and we stayed at this guy's house who like invited us to his workplace, which was a marketing company, and they like marketing and advertising, and they would do stuff for like Gatorade, like design Gatorade's logos or whatever. And so we went to their office, and they had just, you know, art everywhere. It was like what you would expect a marketing and advertising office to look like. They're like, let's have a push-up contest break. And I was like, is this a real place? Come on. But we went into this like main boardroom office, and they just had this huge wall that was covered in whiteboard paint. And ever since that moment, that has just been my dream.
Yeah.
Would be to have an office where one giant wall is whiteboard paint.
Yes. I've always wanted that. There's that scene in the movie The Accountant where he's just got a whole entire glass wall and he's like frantically scribbling on it with markers. And I just so badly wanted that. Yes. Oh my gosh. Just like a whole house of that, please. I don't need real walls. I'll just live in a house of my ideas.
Yes.
So another question I had, which I thought would maybe be interesting, was have you guys had ideas for books that, like, weird things that have happened to you, or not even weird things, just like normal things? Like I had, I was in an elevator one time in my apartment, and a guy got on with me, and he was already a little bit creepy. And I thought initially that he was mimicking my body language. Like I had folded my arms in front of me, and he did the same, and I had like tilted my head, and he tilted his head, and I was like, what is happening? And then he stopped shortly after that, so I think it was just a coincidence. But after I got off and I was not afraid of being murdered anymore, that had got my brain going, and I was like, what an amazing inciting incident. Could you imagine just getting on an elevator and having someone copy everything you do?
It makes
and then getting off, are they going to follow you?
Story.
What's that?
It makes me think of Susan Dennard's Choose Your Own Adventure story.
I was thinking that.
Well, I haven't read that one yet. Clearly, I'm going to have to read that now. I keep seeing it pop up.
So good. And I'm like so stressed about all the decisions. Every choice, I'm like, I don't know what to choose.
Is it creepy?
No.
But there's like changelings, but it's not, so far it's not super creepy. I think it could get more creepy later. I'm not sure.
Cool. I like creepy. I don't like I went to see Annabelle last night. That's not the type of creepy I like. That's ridiculous and scary. I like unsettling, I think, is that type of thing. Like if I read a beginning where someone got on an elevator and some dude was copying every single little movement she did, I would be like, yes, I need to read this. Yeah, just weird and unsettling. So I don't know. That was my question. Have you guys had an incident that, like, not even a weird, creepy thing, just like something that happened to you or something said specifically that you can remember that sparked an idea?
I remember one time I overheard a conversation between like two college age girls, and they were talking about some guy they knew. And like one of them was like, oh, he's like stupidly charming. And, like,
that's so great.
And I was like, I love that line so much, and I like really want a character I can use.
You're like with your notebook, like stupidly charming.
Ethan. I don't know if I can think of a specific instance. There's definitely a lot of like subtext maybe in my books where it's like, if you pay any attention, you can be like, look, there's Megan's religious trauma from her childhood. So a lot of that, just like a lot of, and sometimes I'll pull like just random, here's this marching band interaction I had, and here's what I would have done if I'd had a better comeback. I'd been a 30-year-old woman at the time and had time to come up with a comeback.
I actually have, like, now that you said that about like religious trauma or whatever, I actually have, because so much of Christianese is so distinct, I have specific sentences that people actually said to me a lot in Witches of Ash and Ruin. Like there's a lot of so yeah, like not fun at the time, but very good creative inspiration for later. So yeah, I love stuff like learning later that, for example, like J.K. Rowling, that guy was based on someone I actually knew, or like that person was a and one of the interviews she was saying, and she wouldn't say who, obviously, but she was like reading a book in an old church that she had revisited, and was like, oh, look, there's one of the parishioners' names. And she's like, oh, she's like, I can't say it out loud because one of my characters is based on him. Like stuff like that, right? You know, like Umbridge was one, and what's his name?
I know she said Lockhart is based on
Lockhart.
somebody.
Yeah,
because what I've always
Lockhart
heard
was
is her saying that like Lockhart was the only person that she like based on a real person. So that's interesting because I remember that back in the day, her saying that. And then she was basically like, I think she said like the person would like, I can't remember if she said the person would never guess it was them, or like that the person would like, of course, guess it was them. Or I think she said the person would like guess that she based some other character off of them, you know, because like, they're so like full of themselves, you know, that like they never would expect that they're the Lockhart character. They would think that they're like Harry or something, like a hero.
I'm clearly Dumbledore.
Yeah. One of the things I've started liking doing lately is like just putting little clues into books. So I like if there's a song I really like in a book I wrote earlier this year, there's this song I really like that sings about a place called Reverie, and so I named the town in my book Reverie.
Oh, nice.
Or I have a part in my book right now where that I'm about to be drafting a scene that like mentions a book about one of Erin's characters, basically, where it's like it's a girl who can make paintings come to life. I think that's so fun when other authors do that, and I was like, well,
it totally is
doing that now, and I find it really inspiring to just be like, well, where can I throw this thing in?
I actually,
that's so fun.
I haven't told you this yet, but on the day that Megan had her baby, I like inserted a character in my book with the same name as her.
Oh, that's so cute.
I love it.
Oh my god.
It's like his name doesn't even quite linguistically fit into like the culture of the story. And I was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
There's a scene in Witches of Ashton Ruin where Regan, the character, calls Dana's ex-boyfriend a douche lord. And it's a 2014 Pitch Wars thing because we have a Facebook group and everyone tries to fit the word douche lord into their work somewhere. And I was so sad because I couldn't put it in Bryony Gray because like 19th century England, they're not going to use that term. So I was finally able to put it in. So yeah, I just love stuff like that where you catch like, oh, I know this person knows that person, and they're referencing each other, and it's so good. It's like, what is it that does that? The book series that does that.
Illuminate has a lot of authors' names in it. A lot of authors' names.
Yeah,
in it.
Illuminate. Yeah,
and I love like a lot of people, kind of in like Becky Albertalli's like writer social circle. Like they all mention Oreos in their books. Like they all have like their take on which type of Oreos is best, like in their books.
That's amazing. That's so fun. I wanted to touch on, and this is gonna be bring things down a little bit, but I don't think we could do a talk on creative process and creativity in general without touching on this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of creativity and how mental health kind of goes hand in hand with that sometimes. And Elizabeth Gilbert talks a lot about this in her book Big Magic as well, how society looks at artists as kind of like depressed people sometimes. And a lot of writers have committed suicide or died young or become alcoholics. And I really think that media portrays artists and writers in general in a really negative way sometimes when it comes to mental health. Like it's depicted as subtly dark and dangerous and exciting, and like you can't be creative unless you're also depressed or also an anxious person. And I'm not saying that it doesn't often go hand in hand, because like I know a lot of us do struggle with mental illness, but I think it's something for me personally at least that impedes my writing. I write in spite of it, not because of it. So yeah, I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that. Like I said, bring it down a little bit. Woo.
I think a lot of times it gets framed as like mental illness like inspires people to be writers, but I think it's more, I think the reality is really that just people who are likely to be creative are also the same types of people who are likely to have mental illnesses, because we're so in our heads.
Yeah.
And I think it's just that it's two like kind of like personality traits or whatever that often occur in the same people.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like two creative spaces are spaces in which it's easier to talk about having mental illness. Like, you know, it's not glamorous for the computer programmer to stand up on her desk and be like, hey guys, I really don't want to be here anymore. You lose your job. Like, it's not
true.
as appropriate or considered as appropriate to talk about it. Whereas in writing, we can be like, hella depressed today, guys. How's it going?
Which is
artistic
so funny
endeavors in general. I think it's more socially acceptable to talk about. Yeah,
the funny thing is, like, it's that's so true, and I had never framed it like that before. But I really think that's a good and also a bad thing, because writers are almost expected to have mental illness because it's part of being creative, and it drives your creativity and all of this, not necessarily good way of thinking about it, but it also does open the door to be able to talk about it. So that's good, but also like not necessarily coming from a great place to begin with. Because I don't get my work done when I'm having a bad OCD day or a bad anxiety day. That really puts a damper on my creativity. And you wouldn't know that from, songs or depictions in media, that type of thing.
And like the glorification of mental illness in creative people, like adds the pressure on and like almost makes things worse. Or it doesn't almost, it makes things worse.
Yeah.
Like I was listening to a podcast this week that talks about a lot of different things, but the episode was talking about like mental illness and depression. And they interviewed this girl who was talking about like when she was a college student, her depression got really bad. And that like part of what like compounded it and made it even worse is like she was a creative writing major. And like she like literally like had people say things like, well, like David Foster Wallace wrote Infinite Jest while he was super depressed, like basically like kind of expecting her to write like why aren't you writing the great American novel, is like basically like what she got from it. Like if you're so depressed, you should be able to write like these great, amazing books too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Why I said like it made her feel like she was failing at being mentally ill.
Yeah.
Like not just failing at being a human being, but like failing at being mentally ill. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, and that's so damaging. Or to feel like you should, if I'm happy while being creative, I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Or
like if I can't create while I'm depressed, I can't even do depression right, Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? The funny thing is I had this essentially a fight. I had a fight with my therapist originally. I'm not really with her anymore. I'm with someone else. That's one of the reasons. But I really fought her initially because she wanted me on meds. And I kept saying to her, what if it blocks up my creativity? What if I am on that and I don't have good story ideas anymore? I don't have inspiration anymore. And or maybe, I was scared that I would even stop wanting to write at all, right? That I wouldn't be a writer anymore, essentially. And I realized before I finally was like, yes, I do need this. I realized I'm feeling this way because of what media has taught me. We have a special guest. And it was because, I keep having that idea pounded into my brain that like writers have mental illness. It goes hand in hand. And if I don't have that mental illness, it must mean I'm not a writer, and that's a really toxic, negative way of thinking. And it made me realize that even though I keep saying that that's not the way I think, I had that drummed into me so much.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a lot that goes into that with like misconceptions about medications.
Absolutely.
And a lot of it is based around old medications. Like things have improved a lot. And I think a lot of people still think that like, especially depression meds, a lot of people think that they still are going to just like even you out to a point where you have like zero emotion.
No emotion. Yeah.
And like, that's like really outdated, like they've improved the medication since then. And so, yeah, there's definitely like, and you hear people say that, like, aren't you scared that you'll just be like a robot if you're on medications,
I literally had people say that to me. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, I can't, because I had friends that were like, oh yeah, my second cousin's husband's dog walker took medication and they turned into a zombie. Yeah. They quit writing, or they quit singing, or they quit whatever, horseback riding. and they weren't themselves anymore. And so I was terrified, right?
I knew someone who like had like an aunt, I think, who like had really severe mental illness, and she was on medications, and like the family members, like I remember them saying something like, well, like now she's just like nothing. She's like a zombie, like basically like acting like it would have been better for her to continue to be mentally ill than to be what she was. And it's like, would you rather she like be dead? Like,
Yeah.
you know, like, or be like super miserable and like unable to function in life? Like,
and what people don't seem to understand is it's not like you're forced to stay on that medication. You can adjust it. You can try new ones. You can, like, just stay a zombie if it's not working for you.
Yeah, not all medications are the same.
Yeah, it's a myth. Being on meds for the time that I was, like, it saved my life. It saved my productivity. I was more creative than I had been before, because before I was miserable. And I couldn't do anything. And so I got on a med that worked for my body, and I was able to do things again and to function.
Exactly.
To work through the things that I needed to work through.
Yeah.
It's hard to be creative when all you can manage is like laying in bed, like scrolling through like social media. Like you can't like manage to do anything other than that. Like, how are you supposed to write a book and be creative?
No, like, well, especially for me, because like if I have a really bad OCD flare-up, it's like the same thing going through my mind over and over. There's literally no room for anything else. Meaning I cannot focus on what I'm writing. I cannot focus on plot holes. I cannot brainstorm. None of that is going on. It's just the same thing, right? So medication frees up that space in my brain and allows me to actually function and write. So
when I'm really anxious, like the idea of like sitting still, like sitting down in a chair, sitting still, focusing on something, like I can't focus. That's like a big part of the issue when I'm really anxious, is I can't focus. Like I can only handle just like putting a movie on and just like laying there and staring at it, you know?
Yeah. And obviously, it's such a personal choice. If you are considering going on meds, that is totally between you and your doctor. Decide what is going to work for you, but don't feel like if you do get mental health care help, whether it's through talk therapy or talk therapy and meds, like there's no reason to feel like you are somehow less creative because you didn't power through it. Like you're still powering through it no matter what.
Yeah, that's actually something I talk a lot about in Witches of Ash and Ruin, because the main character has the same thing I do, which is the somatic OCD. And I just wanted people to know that it's like my experience, which was I was scared to do it. I put it off for a really long time, and doing it was what really helped me. But other people might have talk therapy might work better for them, or CBT, the cognitive behavior training, like that might be what really does it for them. And meds might not work out for them. So like everyone needs to find their own way of coping the best that they can. So I just wanted to touch on how often creativity and mental health is linked, not to bring the conversation down, but
it's important. And it's important to like understand that they aren't like inextricable from each other. You know, you can be creative and have mental health issues that you are working through, and just be gentle with yourself if that's something you are dealing with. Don't feel like because you have mental illness that you aren't going to be as creative, and so you aren't as serious or anything. Just like take the time you need, get the help you need. And it's okay if you're not feeling creative. That doesn't mean you aren't creative, you know?
Exactly. And I think it's okay too. Like I have to tell myself a lot, like taking a break is okay. You don't have to write this, or even this week, deal with your mental health, and then you can get back to it, right? Because there is a lot of, especially with stuff like Nano. I love Nano. I love word sprints. I love all that stuff. But if you're having a really hard mental health day or a mental health week, I think it's really important to know that you can take a step back. And even away from Twitter or whatever, if somebody's posting about their 7,000 words in a day and you get really bummed out, just take a step back and be like, I don't have to look at this. I don't have to achieve this right now. That's okay. And self-care is important, right? So
for sure. And I think V.E. Schwab talks about this a lot on her Instagram and stuff, how putting words on the page is creative, but there are a lot of things that are not putting words on the page that are still creative and can still count towards your writing or whatever, you know, brainstorming,
Absolutely.
going out and learning something new. If it's a particularly bad day, just taking a shower and just thinking in the shower, like that can count, you know, all the things that you're doing that'll help promote your ideas flow.
Or even going to a movie, like I was talking about before, that really helps to get some ideas flowing. And if I'm having a crappy mental health day, it can be helpful to take my mind off things too, right? Go see the big screen, right? Get distracted. And it's still, I still think of it as a form of work, especially if I'm going to see like a fantasy or something, which I know will get the ideas flowing, right? I think a lot of the time we think of our creative process as not a part of writing, not a part of work, but I really think, you know, all that brainstorming, seeking out inspiration, that's all still part of the process. Your creative process is still work, you know.
For sure. We had an interesting comment in the discussion section. A number of mine pointed out only 100 words a day is still 36,500 words a year. And like that's such an important thing to remember, you know, just like small steps forward still result in books.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You'd imagine they do.
Yeah. So we're definitely over an hour now. Does anyone have any last thoughts on the creative process? Wrapping up here.
Don't think that your creative process has to be like anybody else, like any of ours or anybody else's. Like some people like have some like kind of like wacky things or things that sound like amazing and you wish that like it could be that way for you, and it's okay that it doesn't.
That's very true. I do that all the time where I'm like, oh, I want to try this. It sounds so amazing. And then I'm so crestfallen when it doesn't work for me.
And someone's like, I can exercise and drink a cup of coffee and sit down and just like block out into the words, you know? Like,
Probably I'll be really tired. I don't know.
You're just gonna be like super wired.
And I'm also a huge fan of Susan Dennard. I know I've mentioned her a few times in this chat already, but she is a person who, like me, is a very strong believer in the idea that you can break down what you're doing and you can figure out how to be more creative, how to write books better. So I would definitely recommend checking out her website if you're interested in taking a deeper look at like habit creating and all of those different things. She has so many good resources on her website and on her YouTube page, which I put a link to one of her YouTube videos in the discussion section already. So definitely, if you're looking for more information, check her out.
Awesome.
She's really good at like demystifying creativity, because she's not all about like the muse and like you just wait for it to come to you, because she's like a scientist, and I feel like she kind of like takes that approach to her writing and creativity, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, not confusing. Susan Dennard is great. So thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. You guys have been awesome. So much amazing, awesome thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if it's your first time here. We love all of our word nerds. So happy reading, happy writing, and we'll see you next week. Bye.